Welcome to the podcast of the Public Education Foundation.
I'm Zhan Okuda-Lim, Resident Fellow with the Leadership Institute of Nevada. I'm here today with Dr. Heather Harding, who is the Director of Policy and Public Understanding at the Schusterman Family Foundation. Heather, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So Heather, tell us a little bit more about the work you do at the Schusterman Family Foundation and some of your work in educator talent development in that field.
Sure. So the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Foundation has been investing in education for about the last 4 years. And I like to use the tagline that Schusterman hearts teachers because the majority of our grants and investments are focused on helping the adults in the system be great at serving kids. So we fund initiatives improving the quality of teacher preparation, expanding their clinical experience before they get in the classroom, and ensuring that they have great content pedagogical knowledge. We also support grantees and then make investments in ensuring that there's high quality professional learning and that comes with and is attached to aligned curriculum and instructional materials. We really believe that teachers deserve those kind of supports so that they can live out their dream of helping students learn.
Let's jump right into that topic, talking about educators and talent. Here in Nevada, there's been conversation the last couple of years, and it's really picked up in the last year with our new superintendent in the Clark County School District, Dr. Jesus Jara, and with our state legislature currently meeting now, about teacher pathways and the teacher pipeline. Tell us some of the examples or trends that you're seeing in other states or in other school districts where school systems are finding ways to recruit and train effective educators who then can go into the field. What are you seeing out there?
So, let's see. I think we have a grants portfolio that's focused on teacher preparation, and we primarily have worked with alternative route certification programs, but we intend to share the kind of learning that we do with our grantees with all teacher education and teacher preparation programs. A couple of trends that we're noticing is that everyone actually wants pre-service teachers to have a longer and more meaningful, authentic experience to get ready. So experiences with real kids. And the implications for that around recruitment are that there are communities that would more naturally be open to becoming teachers, and so we have to look there before we enter them into preparation programs. So after school providers, kids who've expressed interest in tutoring and mentoring while they're undergrads, teacher aides who are working in classrooms already with kids, those are all pools that seem under-leveraged or untapped. We also see that increasingly there's an evidence base for ensuring that the teacher pool is more racially diverse, and we think that some of those pools are really important, but that has to be intentional. We think right now the teacher pool is about 80% white and female. And so we have a long road to go, but if states can incentivize increasing the diversity within preparation programs, we feel like that would be helpful for districts who are doing a lot to recruit folks, not pitting them against each other, but actually increasing the amount of supply. So we see a lot of that. And then I think just in general, we believe that you can prepare folks as best as possible for day one, but the job of teaching is complex and challenging and dynamic. So over time, teachers are always going to need opportunities to have ongoing learning. You're never in front of the same kids every year, or rarely are you. There are a diverse array of human beings, and so how they engage with the content, what their passions are, is different, and teachers need tools to address those differences over time.
You mentioned the importance of recruiting teachers from diverse backgrounds, diverse racial backgrounds. What are some examples you or your colleagues at the Schusterman Family Foundation are seeing on school districts or teacher preparation programs that are making efforts to hire or recruit or admit more diverse educator candidates? What are some examples of how folks are doing that?
Yeah, well, one important fact is that minority serving institutions actually produce the biggest number of teachers of color, but they are not well integrated into hiring systems or well known. So we just made an investment in a new organization called Branch Alliance. It provides technical assistance to teacher preparation programs at minority serving institutions, so HBCUs, tribal colleges, Hispanic serving institutions, to improve the quality of those programs and then connect them to various teacher pipelines, both through state networks, but also through professional networks.
With your time with the Executive Leadership Academy, there's been discussions about educator effectiveness, teacher evaluations, and professional development for teachers who are currently in the field. Now, here in Nevada, there's an ongoing conversation among our local and state policymakers on how to implement an educator effectiveness system that is geared more towards professional development and coaching and less towards punitive discipline of teachers. The emphasis ought to be more on developing teachers and making them as effective as they can be. That's been in the conversation. With your work at the foundation, what investments have you made and what work are you seeing being done in school districts and in states to promote more educator development for teachers who are already in the field?
Yeah. On the policy and advocacy side, this is a really interesting question because since we heart teachers and we believe that teachers show up wanting to do their best work, we think they're deserving of the kind of professional learning supports that they need in the job. There are a lot of public dollars, both at the federal and state level, that support that aim, and yet there are very few measures of whether or not that professional learning dollar is effective. So we think that's an important addition that's not punitive, but that it does actually track how those dollars support teacher learning and improvement. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we do believe that an accountability system that measures student learning is important, and yet evaluation systems have reduced the impact of a teacher to a single test score, and that's problematic, particularly if it has consequences for people's employment if they haven't actually had support to learn and grow. So we think that's important. I wouldn't point to any particular investment that we're making, but one of the things that we are trying to do is to ensure that there are good definitions for what high quality professional learning looks like, so you can recognize it when you see it and that you can connect it to the investments that policymakers are making.
It brings to mind with the federal Every Student Succeeds Act, there's an even greater drive now to get good data, whether it's in student achievement or with educator effectiveness or with state grants to educator preparation and development. But it's important to see where the dollar's going and are they making that intended impact with the use of data.
Exactly. And this is data that should be already available. So we know that teachers are constantly measuring what their students know and are able to do. So how can you let that up in a policy scenario that doesn't burden the teachers? We also know that every state is going to select an assessment that they're going to use for promotion, and using that information to feed into the system so that we're not adding testing burden, but we're using the information more smartly.
That's an interesting point. Here in Nevada, as of the last legislative session, so going back to 2017, the state shifted away from having standardized tests be part of the educator evaluation system and more towards student learning goals or student learning outcomes. And the idea is that every student learns differently, every classroom is different, every subject area is different, and teachers ought to have more authority to track the learning goals of that teacher's students in that class, in that context. And one of the concerns about student learning goals has been how can a system, say the entire school district, be able to understand differences in learning between students in different classrooms if they're using different assessments or if they have different goals. Of course, the state has the state standards of what students are supposed to know by the end of a course or the end of a grade level, but teachers might have different ways of evaluating those goals, right? What's your take on finding the proper balance between, as you mentioned, not going to just one standardized test, but also ensuring there's ways for educators to understand where their students are, right, especially if students are moving around often in the system?
I think the impetus to move away and put more ownership in the hands of teachers makes sense. But I'm going to give the unpopular answer, which is that we need a both and. And so we need a system that absolutely empowers teachers to define and collect information about their student learning and feed that into a system. We also need a system that is for accountability. Did the kids learn what we expected them to learn? And this gets to the equity agenda, that if there's no single standard, then it's very difficult to know if the system is falling down for kids who have historically been left behind. Mm-hmm. So that's important too. My favorite professor in graduate school used to say there are dilemmas in policy and in life. Dilemmas are not solved, they're managed. And so at different points, we have to make decisions about when we'll give a test that's not necessarily useful because of the timing for teaching and learning goals, but is absolutely essential to measure the performance of the system overall. So we do need a both and. I think with the learning goals, and we see this in more states than just Nevada, that's essential. We're also probably going to need a summative assessment in there. Hopefully that has a larger societal use, but tells us how we're doing as a system overall.
Let's talk about policymakers, decision makers, folks at the local and state levels. In your role at the Schusterman Family Foundation, you're working with school districts, you're seeing what's happening in districts and in states. But I also understand in your prior work before the Schusterman Foundation, you've been in that field, looking at where to make investments that can have the biggest impact on educator effectiveness, good teaching, learning, and student outcomes. So you've seen that policy making field from a couple different perspectives. What would you say are the 2 or 3 most important ideas or concepts that an education decision maker or policymaker should keep in mind before they make that vote or before they propose a law or a regulation? What should our policymakers be thinking about before they jump in?
Great question. For my money, having policymakers talk to practitioners is essential. So as a policymaker, if you have not put the idea in front of a real teacher, a real principal, and a real student and family to vet it properly, you might make the wrong decision. Teaching is a complex body of work. It's intellectually demanding, it's rigorous, and it's far more sophisticated than we can understand from the public stance. And so what might seem like common sense in a policymaker's mind might land in the world of practice and on classrooms in a completely impractical way. So we actually make a lot of investments that help policymakers see teaching in action, be in schools, to understand how their policy idea has landed on the ground. So I think that that's essential, really testing it with stakeholders, how they're going to hit. The other thing I do think is, I think most educators understand the value of a public dollar and would embrace accountability, but they want to be at the table at the beginning of the formation of these policies. So I don't run into teachers who bristle at being held responsible for their students' learning. That's why they became teachers, to help spark learning. But what they don't want is for people to go into the chamber figure out the solutions and then rain them down. They want to be part of the process.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because that's the work we're doing even here at the Public Education Foundation through our executive and teacher leadership academies, working with educators in the field and connecting them with decision makers and policymakers, because like you said, educator voice is vital to the decisions that affect education, that affect students and teaching and learning. Heather, thank you so much for your time with us, with our Executive Leadership Academy, and for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, it's a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.